Good evening from New York. A jaw-dropping report from the Department of the Interior stating today that Big Oil was not virtually writing its own safety inspection reports. It was literally writing its own safety inspection reports. Our fifth story is BP today prepared for tomorrow's attempt to cap its spill under tremendous pressure. We learned that BP and Big Oil have been under virtually no pressure from government regulatory agencies because those agencies were Big Oil. Our fifth story tonight, obviously, said Larry Williamson, the manager of the Minerals Management Service, MMS, Lake Charles District. We're all oil industry. The report saying oil industry officials would fill out safety inspection reports themselves in pencil, and MMS inspectors would then trace over them in pen before signing them. Then there was the inspector who showed up for work still high on crystal meth, and the other inspector who inspected 4 offshore rigs of a company he was at the time negotiating with for a job, which he got. The rigs, meanwhile, got no violations. And the other inspectors who got free lunches from Big Oils and other meals, too, and gifts and golfing and shooting and hunting trips and tickets to the 2005 Peach Bowl. The bigger problem, perhaps not the gifts, but the suggestion they were unnecessary at a revolving door agency filled with childhood friends of employees of the oil industry. A ConocoPhillips employee emailing an MMS inspector, quote, "Ever get bribed? They try all the time. Ever take them? I accept, quote, gifts from certain people, but we have very strict ethics standards, as you could imagine." Certain people, the ConocoPhillips employee asks, meaning women? No, the MMS inspector writes, meaning good friends that I wouldn't write up anyway. In October 2008, U.S. Attorney Donald Washington decided not to investigate the allegations that led to this report, a report of drug use and other criminal activity. Washington had previously served as chief counsel for ConocoPhillips, where he worked for 14 years. This year, he left the U.S. Attorney's office for a law firm focused on regulatory compliance, Jones Walker, which defends oil companies and is a joint venture of ConocoPhillips. Despite the fact that investigation has been going on for years since an MMS official was fired for taking gifts, the Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Salazar, only today asked for the investigation to be broadened. Quote, "This deeply disturbing report is further evidence of the cozy relationship between some elements of MMS and the oil and gas industry." Salazar last year named former BP Vice President Sylvia Baca as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Land and Minerals Management. Only tonight did BP, meanwhile, agree not to cut off its live video feed during tomorrow's attempt to cap the spill. At the same time, it admitted that the attempt itself might even make the spill worse. The so-called top kill method, dumping heavy mud over the regulation or the disaster, could become its own disaster were the mud to further rupture the pipeline. We also learned today the president will visit Louisiana on Friday to assess the spill containment efforts, and that he reportedly had told his aides, quote, "Plug the damn hole," and that he had told them that during the first week of the month-old spill disaster. Today, for the third time, a single Republican stood up to block unanimous consent on raising the cap for oil company liability from its present $75 million. This time, Democratic Senator Menendez wanted to eliminate the liability cap altogether.
This is a chance to show if we stand with big oil companies or with small businesses, with fisheries, with coastal communities, with tourism, with hotels, with all of those individuals, fellow Americans who are being hurt by this disaster. It's an opportunity to say, do we stand up with the American taxpayer or with corporate shareholders? Seems to me the choice is pretty clear.
Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst Lawrence O'Donnell, former chief of staff, of course, to the Senate Finance Committee, and now, good evening.
Good to be here, Keith.
Ken Salazar appointed to clean up the Interior Department, and he brings in more big oil people, and he only breaks up MMS after this Deepwater Horizon disaster, and he only orders new investigations after this one with these Frankensteinian details goes public, with the same environmental groups that opposed his appointment today calling for his firing. How long does he have left on this job, or is he doing just fine in the eyes of the administration?
Well, according to the Dennis Blair clock, Keith, he probably has 90 days unless this thing starts to turn in his favor. I think Salazar and his staff are looking at the Dennis Blair model and saying, okay, you know, there was the so-called Christmas bomber, attempted bomber, and then about 3 months later, or 4, Blair's out of there. Salazar may have a shorter time frame than that for this. On the other hand, if the intervention works tomorrow, then everybody who's in a Salazar kind of position here gets to breathe easy. But I think the administration is going to have to look at this, no matter what happens tomorrow. They're going to have to look at it going forward, and has Salazar clamped down enough on the kinds of reports that we've seen today about how these agencies operate?
The administration keeps pointing to the law that dates post-Exxon Valdez. It says companies have to do the cleanup, but the law also lets the government ride herd. Does that mean that the president owns this now politically?
He does own it politically, and since there isn't really something that a politician can do to solve a scientific problem that is stumping everyone else who's staring at it, what he has to own now is the outrage. He has to own the outrage over what happened here, and he has to name what it is that happened here. What we have, we're well into it now, and we're concerned with the environmental cleanup, but what this begins as, the night this event occurs, is this is a homicide. There are 11 people who are the victims of a corporate homicide in the Gulf of Mexico. And I don't hear the rage coming out of the White House over that incident. That's what this is. This is the president who made American mining history by going to that funeral in West Virginia of the horrible incident that occurred at the mine in West Virginia. I don't get the same sense that the same level of outrage is present over the 11 deaths here. The 11 deaths that are so easy to forget when we deal with the day-to-day cleanup of what's happening here. And that is a crime that needs to be addressed with the full energy of the government.
And when we have the information that we have basically of the reports for MMS being filled out in pencil by the people who are being regulated and then literally traced in ink by the regulators, combined with something that's just breaking as we speak here. I'll read you the MSNBC account of this, the .com account of this. There's a BP memo that has been sent out to Congressman Waxman, who's now released certain details. 51 minutes before the explosion, more fluid began flowing out of the well than was being pumped in. 41 minutes before the explosion, the pump was shut down for a sheen test. The well continued to flow instead of stopping, and drill pipe pressure also unexpectedly increased. 18 minutes before the explosion, abnormal pressures and mud returns were observed, and the pump was abruptly shut down. I mean, we're now getting a clear picture of what happened in the hour before this thing unfolded, and as it continues to unfold. Is the essence of this now? There needs to be a ramping up of the political anger, as you put it, for each new detail. What is the ratio? Is it a touch and feel thing? How does the president respond each time a new detail like this comes out?
Well, if they'd been approaching this from the outset as a homicide investigation with the kind of care that you approach that, then each one of these new elements that show us what kind of negligence and willful, wanton, and reckless conduct was going on by BP in this case, that would make sense. It would flow into the government's approach to it already. But because, in effect, the way the White House has looked at it from the start was more of an industrial so-called accident. I don't think these things should be called accidents when we have the trail of information that we have about exactly how this thing occurred. This was corporate negligence in the extreme.
MSNBC political analyst Lawrence O'Donnell, also of Huffington Post. As always, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks, Keith.